Welcome, everyone. I'm Siobhan Carroll from Intraprise Health, and I'm the host for today's HITRUST Essentials webinar. Thanks for joining us. Today's webinar will focus on HITRUST and how to prepare for and successfully submit for HITRUST certification. The webinar will take about 45 minutes and we'll leave an extra 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. I wanted to go over a couple of quick webinar tips. Throughout the webinar, we'll keep all lines muted to prevent background sounds. If you need to get in touch with me, please use the chat feature, which should appear on the bottom of your screen if you mouse over it. If you have questions that you'd like the presenters to address at the end, please chat them to me whenever you think of them, and Ryan and Michael will answer them. After today's session, you'll receive an email from us. If you're interested in a copy of the slides, please let us know. Okay, we'll give you a little bit of background about Intraprise Health. For those of you who don't know, Intraprise Health is 100% healthcare focused. We're one of the longest tenured certified HITRUST assessors with extensive experience with the NIST cybersecurity framework. We've been appointed to 2 seats on the HITRUST Assessor Council and hold 1 seat on HITRUST's Quality Assurance Subcommittee. We provide a range of cybersecurity services as well as protect a third-party risk management software platform. With that, I'd like to introduce our presenters. Ryan Patrick is Intraprise Health's Senior Vice President of Cybersecurity Services. Ryan has over 17 years of healthcare IT and security experience across multiple security frameworks. As a cybersecurity expert, Ryan brings an innovative perspective to protecting information and organizational resources, having worked as a security analyst at both MetLife and Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Ryan has been a battalion commander at the United States Army Reserve since April 2017. His previous military assignments include serving as Global Enterprise Operations Center Team Chief for U.S. Special Ops, Chief Information Officer for the 42nd Infantry Division within the New York Army National Guard, Deputy Chief Information Officer, and Chief Information Officer of FEMA Region 2 Homeland Response Force. Our special guest today is Michael Parisi from HITRUST. Michael has led over 500 controls-related engagements, primarily in the healthcare and financial services industry. He has extensive experience with third-party assurance reporting, including HITRUST Readiness, HITRUST Certification, SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, agreed upon procedure, and customized AT 101 engagements. He has extensive knowledge of financial reporting and regulatory standards through his external audit and consulting experience, including Sarbanes-Oxley, HIPAA, NIST, CMS, and state-specific standards. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Accounting, a Bachelor of Science in Computer Information Systems, and an MBA from Quinnipiac. He is an active member of ISACA and IAPP. Thank you both for joining us today. Ryan, why don't you take it from here?
Thanks, Siobhan. Good afternoon, everybody. I just want to make a few opening remarks and say that we do these webinars pretty consistently, lots of times monthly, more likely quarterly, and usually it's just me and someone from my team that talk to you about our experiences, what we're seeing in the market, what our clients are seeing and feeling and going through trying to get HITRUST certified. But today, as Siobhan mentioned, we have a really special guest with us, Michael Parisi from the HITRUST Alliance. I've known Mike for several years now, and he comes with a wealth of experience, and really, really excited to have him join us because it's not going to just be our perspective. Mike is going to be able to shed some light and really, kind of give us some real life examples of what the HITRUST Alliance is seeing when it comes to getting through the HITRUST journey. So I wanted to just say some quick words, and Mike, I wanted to thank you personally for joining us today. And with that, I will turn it over to Mike.
Great, thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it. Appreciate joining everyone today, and thanks to Intraprise for being such a great partner on the HITRUST side of the house. So I want to start with sharing some general perspective around HITRUST and really the benefits and the value of undergoing a HITRUST assessment, which hopefully can lead to a certification. And I think Ryan is going to take you through the steps that are necessary in order to achieve that, because it is associated with a minimum level of maturity scoring relative to security and privacy. But oftentimes I get the question in my role here at HITRUST, why should I do this? What are the benefits of me doing this? And you could see several of those that we've listed out on the slide here, but a few things to recognize. There are a number of organizations within the marketplace whereby not having a HITRUST certification or validated assessment actually creates a barrier to entry. Several large health plans and also hospital systems will not do business with certain third parties unless they are in fact HITRUST certified or have a path forward to achieve that. In addition to that, there's other organizations that prefer a HITRUST certification over other types of third-party assurance reporting for many reasons. And really the benefit of that is being in a position whereby you can do one assessment against a standardized set of requirements and controls and use that many times across multiple stakeholders. So it helps you rationalize all these different audit activities or one-off things that you may be doing today for a series of stakeholders. We refer to that as assess once, report many. So the value of having one framework, one standard, one assessment that you can pivot and then produce any type of reporting that's relevant to those stakeholders within the marketplace. Other things associated with that, not only breaking down barriers to entry, but using it as a differentiator because the bar is high in order to achieve a HITRUST certification. Many organizations recognize the investments that third parties are making in order to do that, and it speaks to the maturity of the security and privacy programs that are in place. And it speaks to the willingness to invest in information security and privacy, for which many customers are looking for that in business partners, especially as it relates to the assurances that they're providing in the marketplace. Some other benefits are that the culture aspect. In today's day and age, as we know, many organizations, unfortunately, are siloed relative to information security, privacy, enterprise risk, internal audit, procurement, supply chain. And so how do you use an initiative to bring those organizations together and those stakeholders together, not only to pursue one common goal, but also to speak the same language relative to their security and privacy postures? So lots of benefits there and stories that we hear from organizations undergoing the process. In addition to that, you notice a point around cybersecurity insurance. There's many carriers and underwriters of cybersecurity insurance that recognize, again, the investment and the value that organizations bring to the table by undergoing a HITRUST certification. And you'll recognize in some instances potentially a 50% reduction in your cybersecurity insurance premiums and or an increase in the limitations of your levels. So lots of reasons to consider it, and some of them are pretty straightforward, again, barriers to entry. Some of them are more intangible around cultural changes within an organization. But again, I think the true value is in this concept of assess once, report many. So how do you do this more efficiently, more effectively within the marketplace? So Ryan, if we can go to the next slide. So with that, when we talk about this concept of third-party assurance, right? So if we are a third party, we need to provide assurances to the marketplace. And if we are a customer, covered entity, stakeholder, we need to obtain assurances from our relevant business partners for a number of different reasons. When you think about third-party risk management overall, it's expensive, it can be very time-consuming, and most of us don't have enough resources, whether it be people, time, solutions, technology, et cetera, to address third-party risk management overall. When you think about enterprise risk management as a pie, a piece of that pie is third-party risk management, and that piece is growing larger and larger and larger every day relative to the entire size of the pie. The good news is, I think that speaks to our ability to recognize what our core competencies are and focus on those and look for business partners that can do things cheaper, faster, better than we can. And where those things are their core competencies that we should be leveraging, especially within certain industries like the healthcare space. We need to introduce innovation. We need to introduce disruptors in order to provide better care delivery and to do that more efficiently and more effectively. And as we know, obviously in current times, that's ever more important today than it has been in the past. But with that comes a number of challenges. You know, how do we get our hands around who our third parties are? How do we evaluate them effectively from a risk perspective? How do we determine what level of assurance we should be requesting? And how do we do this in a combined effort with our third-party community so that it's not placing additional burden on them in providing assurances to us? Not all assurance reports are created equal, as we know. So it's important to understand how do we get the highest level of transparency and ultimately reliability relative to those assurances that our third parties are providing us. So the solution that we've developed as part of our third-party risk management program is a combination of multiple legs of a stool, not only the integrated framework that is the CSF that Ryan will take you through in a little more detail, but the assurance program, the defined assessment methodology, having independent certified assessors, for which Intraprise is one of those, to come in and be able to validate what organizations have done and submit it to us ultimately for certification. So if we go to the next slide, Ryan, let's just spend a few minutes on why is there a driving demand for increased assurance. And it's not just, hey, I need some third-party assurance from my stakeholders and business partners, but that level of assurance continues to increase. Those of us that have been around a long time, you know, gone are the days of just being able to provide, for example, a SOC 1 or an SSA 16, or really dating myself, a SAS 70, right? And there are many more types of assurances that organizations are asking for. And there's driving reasons behind that. Naturally, the level of risk that's posed by third parties increases, not only because we're using more third parties, but because when we look at some of the threat indicators that exist across multiple industries, it's obviously impacting our third parties. I don't think it's any surprise to any of us that when you look at the history of breaches and compromise, the majority of those are tied to a third party and not necessarily the customer or the entity themselves. Naturally, the cyber threat landscape is changing by the second, so making sure we understand what our third parties are doing to address those items, even though we may have a good handle on our own organization, oftentimes we are unsure as to what our third parties are doing. Lots of confusion, as I mentioned before, around how much should I be asking for in terms of contract language maybe for my third parties, what type of assessment is sufficient. Unfortunately, I think a lot of organizations just follow suit relative to what they're being asked for. So if Ryan and I are being asked for a SOC report, for example, from our customer, when we put our hat on for our own third parties, we may just default to writing in the contract what we're being asked for without really thinking through what level of assurance do we need. And then lastly, and naturally, as we know, the compliance and risk associated with breaches, et cetera, continues to increase. It might be a stretch to say the regulators are getting smarter, but you know, they certainly have less tolerance where organizations are trying to say, well, I outsourced a certain function, which means I outsourced the risk. As we know, we always own the risk. And when you look at recent regulations, for example, GDPR, CCPA, there's certainly liability associated with a lack of diligence around our third parties. So moving on, Ryan, I think the important thing to note and the call to action for all of us, whether we are customers that are running a proprietary third-party risk management program with most likely outdated information security questionnaires, really isn't giving us the right level of transparency, even if organizations are completing them. Doing our own on-site audits with, again, maybe a dated audit program that's not reflective of the updates in the threat landscape. And that is very expensive, time intensive to run, and we're probably only scratching the surface relative to our overall third-party risk from an organizational perspective. So how do we pivot, shift, leverage third-party assurance reporting in place of having to manage that ourselves? And then if we are the third party, having to respond to hundreds, if not thousands, of proprietary questionnaires and support on-site audits, it's killing us. So how do we work with our business partners that are our customers to really land on something that allows us to provide the level of assurance and comfort that they're looking for, but do that in a way that we can perform one assessment and use it with multiple stakeholders? So I think the punchline is what you see on the left-hand side, that there's no scenarios where these unique assessments make sense, either for us as a customer or for our third parties. And certainly when you look at certain industries like healthcare, where we should be focused on providing a quicker, more efficient, more effective care delivery, and reducing the cost of care delivery, this does nothing but add to it. So how do we address that together is what we are focused on. Go ahead, Ryan.
Thanks, Mike. And I think Mike has done a great job of kind of setting the stage of what brings us here. And I have a few slides that touch on that, but I'm going to actually breeze through those pretty quickly because I want to get to kind of the meat and potatoes of the actual assessment and what the CSF is. But I do think it's important to point out something about the HITRUST CSF. You look at some of the numbers there on the bottom left. This comes directly from the HITRUST Alliance based on their own research, and what they're seeing out there in the field is 81% of US hospitals and health systems and 80% of US health plans have somehow utilized the CSF, whether through certification or through adoption. They're utilizing the CSF for their own security and privacy programs. And I think that speaks volumes. One, it speaks volumes because obviously the industry has kind of wrapped its arms around the HITRUST CSF because it was born out of healthcare. The great thing about what the CSF is doing is it's really scalable. So yes, it was born out of healthcare, but it can really be used in any industry. And it applies, the concepts apply really kind of across the board, not just for healthcare, but it really is relevant in healthcare because it is getting after exactly what the HIPAA security rule and the HIPAA privacy rule is asking all healthcare organizations, whether you're a covered entity or a business associate, what they're asking them to do to protect patient information. The other piece of the scalability for the CSF that I find really, really genius, if you will, is that the HITRUST CSF does not assume that you are an enormous multi-billion-dollar organization with lots of resources, lots of time, lots of people, lots of money. It understands that security is going to be managed at the level at which it can be managed in any organization. And it keyed on something that Mike said earlier. It's a minimum set of requirements to get certified. And what that means is that you don't have to be fully compliant for every single requirement within the CSF in order to get certified. So the HITRUST methodology, the assurance program, understands that there really is no such thing as being quote unquote secure, and not every industry can do everything under the sun from a security and privacy perspective. But it gives you a good solid foundation that the organization is focused on security, it is focused on privacy, and it's giving that organization all the tools in its toolkit to adapt and be flexible. So there's a lot of hidden genius, some forcing functions or mechanisms built into the methodology in the assurance program that you may not see exactly on the surface. So what is, the HITRUST certification lifecycle? I want to pause for a second because it's really, really important that you keep your eye on the prize, but it's also super important for organizations that are going on the journey of HITRUST certification to realize that yes, the prize is the certification. For a lot of business drivers, for organizations out there, it's about that certification so you can prove to your business partners or to your clients that you're doing everything that you should be doing or can be doing to protect their confidential information. But it's really, really important to point out, and there's going to be a couple of themes that you're going to hear me talk about through this entire presentation. One is that yes, certification is the prize, but it's really about adoption. And I want you to keep in mind the idea of adoption when looking at this life cycle. So in year one, or when you first start down this journey, or as I call it, a significant emotional event, which is the second theme that you're going to hear me talk about a lot. When you're going down this path, you are going to have to go through an entire assessment, self-assessment, baseline assessment, however you want to call it, readiness assessment, to show that your program's in a certain state. Let's flash forward to you get certified. Well, at the end of 12 months, you're going to be required to do what's called an interim assessment. And then 12 months following that, you're going to have to get recertified. So what we've seen clients fail, or how they failed, and Mike, if you've got any input on this, feel free to chime in, is the day after someone gets certified, they breathe a sigh of relief, and then they go about their normal day jobs because HITRUST is nobody's sole focus. They kind of turn off the HITRUST thought process until the interim and or the recert comes up in the subsequent years, and then it's a sprint. And if you're going to sprint in the last, say, 60 to 90 days before your interim or your recert, it's going to be really, really, really painful and really, really difficult to actually maintain the certification. So what we kind of espouse and what we're preaching at Intraprise is more about adoption. Yes, of course, certification is ultimately the business driver, but the adoption really does two things. One, it will make your life a lot easier in the off years or in the future years. But two, that's really the value of getting HITRUST certified, because if you truly adopt, I'm going to talk about this in a future slide, the whole organization is going to have to get on board with this framework. Sure, HITRUST is focused on IT, and it's focused on security, it's focused on privacy, but it reaches out and it touches everybody. But if you're able to adopt and you make your decisions day in and day out as you're making changes to your policies or procedures, or you're implementing new technologies within your environment, or new onboarding and termination procedures within HR, it's going to make maintaining your certification so much easier, because you're going to be doing it in real time and gathering the evidence and everything that you need to maintain your certification. So when it comes time for those events, life is a lot easier. But oh, by the way, you can be sure that the security and privacy program within your organization is functioning over the full span of time, as opposed to having peaks and valleys. So we'll back up for a second. The first step in getting HITRUST certified is you have to do a self-assessment. And you may be saying, wait, Ryan, phase one says scoping. Very astute of you. Scoping for Intraprise, and I'm going to use my perspective as an example because that's what I live in and day out. We have found out that scoping is by far probably the single most critical aspect or milestone in getting certified and adopting the CSF. If you do not get your scope right up front, it's going to make your self-assessment and even your remediation in phase 3 that much harder, because you could get all the way into phase 3 and realize that you missed systems that you wanted to put in scope, you may have missed facilities, or you've over-scoped, meaning there's more requirements that you have to demonstrate your compliance to, and now your assessment has ballooned up and is completely unwieldy, and it's hard to get your arms wrapped around it. So we spend a lot of time, and we advocate for very deliberate scoping. Understanding the scoping process, understanding that the assessing entity has a lot more power in the scoping phase than they may realize. There's nuances to that. There's an art and a science to all of this. So spending a little bit of time scoping, bringing in an assessor or some kind of certified organization or individual to help you through the scoping process is only going to help you that much more through the entire process, because it is somewhat daunting. So get the answer right from the start. So we do our scoping, we generate the assessments, the organization starts to fill out their assessment. What does that mean? Well, you're going to have to score yourself based on the requirement. How compliant are you? You're going to have to write comments to support the scoring. And then lastly, this is usually kind of the hardest part, is you're going to have to generate evidence that supports not only your comments, but the scoring. So HITRUST, the certification process is a trust but verify to a certain extent. You are going to score yourself, but you're going to have to prove to the third-party assessors that this stuff is in place. And ultimately, you're going to have to prove to HITRUST Alliance that this stuff is in place, which lends itself to Mike's comments earlier about the level of assurance. So you work through your self-assessment, you answer all the requirements, you upload all the evidence, you write all your comments. What you should get back, what you can do on your own, although I would suggest against it, which sounds very self-serving, but it's truthful. It's super easy to become married to your environment. You get very passionate. It's like a baby to you. Nobody likes to call their baby ugly. You may not realize that the holes in the program, just doing it on your own. So what we do at Enterprise is we will do a review of your self-assessment. We will point out where we would score you if today we were going to do a validation. And then if we find that there's a gap, we write notes on what we suggest you do to fill that gap in order to get that requirement to a passing score. And then we launch into phase 3. Phase 3 generally is the long pole in the tent. This is usually what takes the most amount of time. This is where you're going back and you're fixing all the things that you found that either are not exactly what you need it to be, or they're just not in place. So this can come in the form of rewriting policies, updating procedures, writing disaster recovery plans, business continuity plans, implementing technologies that you may or may not have that you need. The important thing to point out is that coming out of phase 2 into phase 3, you want to have a plan. Sure, if we had unlimited time, unlimited resources, and we were all just security purists, we would want to fix everything. But truthfully, that doesn't, in practicality, it doesn't work. You have to be strategic and you have to be smart about what you're actually going to remediate to get to the point of meeting those minimum requirements to get certified. So if you're working with a third-party assessor, ask them to give you a priority. Where should I be focusing my efforts? I can't fix the 100 things that you found. What they should be telling you is, of the 100 things that we found, you should focus on these 10 things, because these 10 things alone will get you to a certifying state. So that's what remediation really consists of, is the organization going back and fixing or closing the gaps that were identified during the self-assessment. Once phase 3 ends, validation is what kicks off. And validation is when a third-party assessor, an external assessor using the new nomenclature, comes in and they do an assessment of your self-assessment, and they validate what you said is in your self-assessment is factual, it's accurate, it is true, it exists. What we do at Enterprise, which I think is really, really beneficial, again, sounds very self-serving. I'm just trying to give you ideas, whether you go with Enterprise or not, for things to be looking for whomever you partner with, is we do what we call an adoption review. And in that adoption review, we kind of, quote unquote, pre-validate you in the sense of we take a look at what you have remediated and say whether we believe that would be at a passing state or not. Our thought process is we don't want to get into validation and suddenly have an I gotcha or an oh no moment where you have requirements or domains that are not passing. So we do kind of a sanity check before we even get into validation, just to have a go no go decision of let's submit for certification. So if you have another partner out there, there are a lot of qualified organizations out there. I would just ask them to kind of do that sanity check for you, because it's only going to set you up for success. So when it comes to validation, what these third-party assessors or external assessors should be doing is they should be reviewing your scores, they should be reviewing your comments, they should be reviewing all of your evidence, and they should be doing testing. This testing can come in a lot of different ways, shapes, and forms. As you're going to see in a future slide, the CSF itself is broken down into many different domains. Based on those domains and based on the requirements, it may be actual manual testing where someone comes on site and is having you bring up firewall rules, or going to each endpoint and checking the antivirus, going to each application and scope and making sure it meets the password complexity requirements, so on and so forth. So there's a whole litany or list of things that those assessors will come and do during the validation stage. Once that's complete, the packaged up in the web-based portal called MyCSF, that gets submitted to the HITRUST Alliance. HITRUST Alliance is going to do some QA on that assessment. They're going to determine whether, one, the assessor did what they were supposed to do, as well as does the evidence support that what's in place for that organization actually meets the requirements. If the answers are yes across the board, that's when you get certified. So that process itself, the rule of thumb is it takes about 8 to 12 weeks. We've seen it happen a little bit faster. We've seen it happen a little bit slower. It just kind of depends on how many assessments have been submitted and the quality of the assessment that has been submitted. That really determines how long that QA and then ultimate certification process takes. So I mentioned 12 months after certification, you're gonna have to go through an interim assessment. That interim assessment is not a complete redo of everything you did in year one. All we're gonna have to do during the interim assessment is we're gonna have to do a quality control check on one requirement in each of the 19 domains, and I'll get into that in a future slide. And then we're also going to have to check the progress on any corrective action plans that were a result of the certification. And again, I'm going to get into that, dig into that a little bit more in a future slide. And what I mean when we check the progress is we're looking for meaningful progress. Does that mean you have to have everything fixed within 12 months of getting certified? No. Should you be making a decent amount of progress, and should things already be closed out and other things in progress, and then a plan to open up everything else that may be still outstanding? Yes. You should be deliberately working on these corrective action plans or these CAPs through that 12-month period. If the third-party assessor, after checking the 19 spot checks in each one of the domains and determines that there's meaningful progress being made throughout the year, the third-party assessor will submit a report to the HITRUST Alliance recommending you retain your certification. That gets blessed off by the HITRUST Alliance based on the evidence provided. You retain your certification for 12 months. You breathe a sigh of relief for 1 day because this is about adoption. You throw a party. The next day you get right back to work because you want to be making decisions every single day and looking back to the CSF and to your assessment and seeing, how does this affect my assessment? Because after the interim, just like the original assessment, you're going to go through the whole thing all over again. So the HITRUST Alliance forces you to reevaluate the assessment to make sure, one, that everything is in place, every single control is still in place, but two, the scope hasn't changed. Within a 2-year period, if you on the line think about all the different things you've done within your company or within your computing environment in the last 24 months, I'm pretty sure you're going to say, oh, wow, we've done a whole lot of stuff. So that can have an impact on the security and privacy posture. So the HITRUST Alliance wants you to reevaluate those things. And ultimately, that cycle continues for as long as you decide you want to maintain the certification. All right, so I've thrown a lot of jargon out there. I've said my CSF, I've said the CSF, I've talked about domains, I've talked about requirements. What does it all mean? So the CSF itself is a subset of just over 1,900 requirements. And that changes with each version. Based on what's happening out there in the industry, as threats are newly found or old threats go away in some ways, or requirements or standards change, the HITRUST Alliance is making updates to the CSF itself. The goal is always at least once a year. We've seen recently that the versions have been a little bit more frequent, with the next version tentatively coming out towards the end of this year, which will be version 10. We're currently on version 9.3. So the CSF itself are those 1,900 requirement statements. And before you get all frazzled thinking, holy moly, I've got to review and justify my compliance with 1,900 requirement statements, take a deep breath. I personally have been doing this for, since 2013. I have never seen anybody even come close to maxing out the total number of requirements available. Our average, we see somewhere between 400, maybe 450 on average for the number of statements on average across kind of our client portfolio. So those, on average, 300 or 400 requirements will be broken down in these 19 domains. And these 19 domains, if you take a look at the names on those domains, you're going to see that this is not just an IT security or privacy certification or framework. It really spans the organization. It is going to talk to HR. It is going to talk to facilities. It is going to talk to executive management. It's going to talk to, obviously, IT, obviously the security department within any organization, privacy, but it's going to reach out to legal. It's going to be looking at contracts. It's going to be looking at any kind of professional development departments that you may have when it comes to education, training, and awareness. It really is pretty comprehensive to make sure that a whole organization is moving in the right direction or charging towards the same things when it comes to security and privacy. So your 300, and again, I'm using that as a very general average, 300 requirements will be broken out across these 19 domains. And the idea about the domains is, you don't want to try to eat the whole elephant at once. Take one piece at a time. You can break up the work between the domains for the related or applicable administrators that you may have for that piece of the assessment. So you may have someone doing your wireless and network work, and they would only get those two domains. And then you can give your information security program and say risk management program to your security officer, and they're working on that. So everybody's doing their own piece of the pie as it relates to them. So it makes getting through the assessment a bit easier, and it makes project management of it pretty simple. So for each of the requirements, you're going to have to demonstrate your level of maturity to the requirements. 5 levels of maturity: policy, procedure, implemented, measured, and managed. I can tell you that, and I'm gonna push ahead because apparently I'm being very long-winded. We're already at 45 minutes in, and I want to make sure we open up for questions. There's art and science to this that I mentioned, and when it comes to scoring, it really matters, since this is such a significant emotional event, where you focus your efforts and where you focus your time. And focusing on all 5 doesn't necessarily have to be the answer, is really the takeaway from this slide. You can focus your efforts on any, well, really probably the first 3, and get certified without having to focus on 4 and 5 unless you absolutely need to make up from a scoring perspective. So it makes focusing the team's effort getting through the assessment a lot easier and a lot more concise than if you're trying to do all 5 levels of maturity, because you can do the math. You had a score for each level of maturity. You got to write a comment for each level of maturity, provide evidence for each level of maturity. 300 requirements on average times 5. That's a lot of mouse clicks. So if you can somehow reduce that, it makes life a lot easier. So I mentioned scoring. If you look on the right side of this slide, not all the maturity levels are created equally, they're weighted. And this is why here at Intraprise, we typically, for first-time certifiers, we'll focus on the first 3 levels of maturity, because if you do the math, if you are able to get 100% compliant or fully compliant in each one of the first 3 levels of maturity, you just scored a 75. Jumping ahead, all you need is a 71 at the domain level to get, in each one of the 19 domains for that matter, to get a certificate. So each individual requirement doesn't have to necessarily pass. This goes back to the scalability and the kind of the realism behind the framework. It's focused on scoring at the domain level. So all of the requirements that fall under a specific domain, the average gets rolled up at the domain level. So if you're able to get a 75 in the first 3 levels of maturity for all the requirements, now you just scored a 75 at the domain level and you're passing. And we didn't have to break into measured and managed. That doesn't say that, again, the scalability of kind of the genius behind the methodology and the framework is you actually can get to a passing or a certifying state by scoring a 62 or higher at the domain level, but you're going to have to write a corrective action plan, which outlines how you plan on getting the domain and all the subsequent requirements to a 71 or higher. And that's what we check during the interim assessment. So those corrective action plans. So we, truthfully, depending on the speed at which the client wants to get certified, the business drivers, several other considerations, we may be focused on getting a 62 as opposed to a 71, because again, it gets to the prize. But then we really push our clients through the adoption after getting certified to raise those scores and really get the maturity of their security and privacy programs to a much higher state. So we prepare for HITRUST assessments. Training the employees on the framework is going to pay very large dividends. You can see on this presentation that there's a lot of jargon, and there's a different lexicon being used for the framework. So if your employees, and I'm talking about the employees that are actually going to help you in HR, in facilities, in the privacy office, in legal, if they don't know the difference between a requirement, a domain, the process and a policy, you're going to struggle, and there's going to be a lot of back and forth. So getting people trained on the framework, at least at minimum, understanding what terms mean and how they apply and how it all works together, I think it's going to get everybody kind of their mind spinning and moving in the right direction. That includes getting management buy-in. If senior management is not bought in and they're not prioritizing this effort, it will likely be drawn out over several years. And I can say that confidently from experience. We've seen clients that have been working through this for 3+ years. Nobody wants that to happen. And it really takes management focus and buy-in to make sure that it happens. Setting realistic and attainable timelines. Don't think you're going to get the certification in 30 days. You're not. I'm just going to be blunt, honest, and transparent with you. Not only is it too difficult to get it all done in 30 days, but there's timelines that restrict us in different milestones, i.e. We have to do certain things within certain windows that just can't be done in 30 days. So make realistic timelines. If you have contractual obligation to get certified by a certain date, and it's anything less than 9 months, talk to your assessor, figure out ways to talk to the person you're in contract with to hit milestones that will kind of relax that very short timeline. A year is about what it takes realistically. Obviously, there's organizations that can get it done faster, as I said, there's organizations that have taken longer. But being honest with yourselves is critical to this whole thing. And I can't stress this enough. Obviously, I want you to come work with my team because I think they're all geniuses and HITRUST ninjas. But engage a partner early on in the process. Make sure they're there for scoping. Make sure they're helping you through the self-assessment, because when you're reading the requirements, there's nuance to those requirements. And understanding the requirements are going to drive how you score and how you comment and the evidence that you provide. So you may not completely understand the requirement. Somebody who's done it before and has gone through the whole process is critical to your success. So Mike, we got 9 minutes left. I have a few more slides, but I didn't know if there was anything you wanted to add to this.
Yeah, Ryan, I mean, I couldn't highlight more the importance of planning, right, as you indicated, and that planning obviously involves multiple things, but that champion, that executive leadership being bought in is absolutely critical. And I think what we've seen is that champion may not necessarily be the CISO, for example, right, or somebody within information security. It could be somebody that's in enterprise risk, or it could be somebody that's responsible for responding to customer requests. Oftentimes it's general counsel, right? So making sure that you have executive buy-in is absolutely critical, especially considering all the different areas of an organization that this is going to touch. This is not just an information security initiative. It will extend into the entire organization. And the other point, Ryan, that you alluded to, the last point, start early. And my advice would be, have a partner involved in the discussions early. Don't try and do this alone. What we often find is organizations that go and try and do their own readiness, for example, their own scoping, their own scoring, and then bring in a partner after the fact. There's oftentimes misalignment, right? We're all good people, but I think we have a tendency to overscore ourselves and think that our programs may be stronger than it actually is. You don't want to be in a position where you're up against it from a contract standpoint and you only have 3 to 4 months to get things done. You bring in a partner then just to have them tell you the last 9 months of work really doesn't align to what we would think. You want to know that up front and approach it together. So those are a couple things that I would highlight based upon, Ryan, what you already indicated.
Thanks. And some of these top challenges are conversely related to what we just talked about. Really, the thing that I want to highlight here is proper scoping. Understand what a system means, what makes up a system, what facilities are relevant, what facilities are not relevant. Right sizing the assessment is really critical. And if you don't get the scope right, it is going to be a significant challenge. And really, it's going to challenge your ability to get the culture within the organization to latch on to kind of the framework and make it a part of their day-to-day operations. Again, keys to success, really, we're harping on the same things. And the reason why this seems so redundant is because we want you to pay attention to it, because these are really the things that are going to make you successful. One of the things that I mentioned earlier, but I want to highlight here again, is be honest with yourself. Mike just mentioned, those folks who are doing the readiness assessments on their own generally have a harsh wake-up call when they bring in a third-party assessor. So be critical with yourself. In fact, I would be conservative in your estimates, in your scoring, if you're going to do it on your own, so that you are forced to look at where your gaps may be in the readiness assessment before you actually bring in a partner, if you choose to go down that path. Because we've seen clients come in that have scored themselves 100% across the board in every single requirement. And for anybody who's in the security world, or has been paying attention to the security world for the last 10 years or so, you would know that that is immediately a red flag if somebody says they're perfect when it comes to security. So be honest with yourself. And I'm going to jump on the bottom comment because I really do think it's so critical to your success and ultimately my success as your partner is adoption. HITRUST does not end with certification. It is a day in, day out consideration of what you're doing and how it's going to impact your compliance with the requirements that are in scope for your assessment. So it's critical that you try to build that culture as quickly as possible. So, Siobhan, to the last slide. I know we only left, but I wanted to see if there was any questions.
Yeah, we have a couple. So thank you both. I really appreciate you taking the time to go through this all today. Let me get right to the questions. The first one is, are there any programs or options that organizations can leverage in the event that their certification activities are impacted with the current pandemic? I don't know which one.
So Ryan, I can take that one. There actually is something that we developed in direct response to the current COVID-19 impacts, and then further extending that out to any unforeseen circumstances that organizations may run into. It's called a bridge assessment certificate. So this is something new. There's information on our website. We also sent out several announcements about that. But the use case was, we had a number of frontline healthcare organizations, hospital systems, HIEs, et cetera, whose certification was approaching expiration, and they did not have the cycles or the time to do the testing, nor were they even able to, considering the current situation, in time before the certification expired. So we worked on a program to provide a bridge assessment. Organizations can apply for it. You can get all the information on our website, or we can follow up with additional information specifically for those organizations that are interested. Intraprise is familiar with it. Matter of fact, has organizations that they are working with to perform this. But there are options available. It is not the same thing as a full certification, but it does extend a level of assurances for 90 days beyond the certification expiration to give organizations some more time and to address the additional testing that needs to be done in support of a new certification. So there are avenues. In addition to that, we have issued in the forms of blog posts, assurance advisories, et cetera, and alerts. It's also on our website around some of the guidance that is relaxed during the current situation. For example, the ability for our assessors to not have to go on site to perform certain tests, being able to do that remotely, et cetera. So there are a series of items that we have put in place relative to the process that you can gain access to on our website.
Thank you. All right, we've got a couple more, so we'll go through as many as we can. And if we don't get to your question, we'll respond to you directly. Where can I find a list of controls so I can build that framework into my environment so I can know the rules of the standard I'm trying to play, then reach out to be assessed? Do I model the ISO 27001 standard?
So go ahead, Ryan.
You're better to answer this.
Yeah, so the framework itself is actually based off of ISO 27001, 27002. There's two avenues with which you can gain access to the framework. So the framework of the controls is free for any qualified organizations. You can download it on our website. You just have to indicate that you are a qualified organization, which basically means you're not going to use the framework to sell commercial related services. You can gain access to it from our website. The level of detailed information you're going to need in the event you're going to proceed with obtaining a certification or a validated assessment, the process that Ryan just walked us through is actually at two levels down. So the way the framework is structured is high-level controls that explain what the details are, in addition to a crosswalk mapping to all the 44 different authoritative sources that you get when you download the framework. So somebody that, for example, already has ISO, somebody that may already have a SOC 2, they can use that to understand, okay, where may I already have coverage from a HITRUST perspective, and what's the gap? What do I need to focus on? As you move forward with undergoing an actual validated assessment or certification, you're going to need the details underneath each one of those controls, which is the control requirements, in addition to the implementation standards. And that can be obtained from getting an advanced license of the framework through a MyCSF subscription, for which there's information available on our website. And again, Intraprise is very familiar with that and how to help you get that information. So today you can get the controls from the framework with the crosswalk. If you're going down the path of an assessment, Intraprise can guide you around how to get the right level of subscription and information needed to do that.
Okay, thanks. I've got a bunch more. So if we don't get to your question, we will we'll follow up. This one is, if SOC 2 certified, how much overlap with HITRUST? Will the expected time frame still be expected to take 9 months to certification?
Yeah, so Ryan, I don't know if you want to take first stab on that.
Yeah, so it's always fun. It's hard to be really definitive. So I will be honest with you up front that I'm going to kind of give you a vague answer. You will identify some economies via the SOC 2 work. The timelines could be reduced, but it really depends on the specific circumstances of your scope, of exactly what was assessed, how much of the in-scope environment for SOC 2 is in scope for HITRUST, and when was that assessed. So if it was 2 years ago, that work through HITRUST eyes is considered outdated. So we may have to reduce some of that work, but if you're doing it in tandem, there's already programs in place offered by the HITRUST Alliance to do some of that, where HITRUST will recognize some of SOC 2's work and vice versa. So you can realize some economies there, but it's really hard for me to be specific in answering because I don't know what your specific circumstances are. I hope that's helpful.
Okay. Hey, we've got a bunch more questions, but I know we're running out of time. So for the people, I can see the names on here. We will get back to you with the answers to your questions. And otherwise, I wanted to thank everybody for coming. If you have any questions that you didn't get a chance to send us to, you can email them to me at scarroll@intraprisehealth.com. You can also go to our website, and if you have thoughts on future webinars you'd like us to cover, please let me know. And follow us on LinkedIn for updates on new webinars that are coming. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks, Michael and Ryan.
Thank you, guys.